Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Shaq Fu, brought to us by Electronic Arts. This version of the game on the Sega Genesis is better than its Super Nintendo counterpart. It has a better soundtrack, more solid controls, as well as plenty of more characters and levels for you to fight on. So here we go with Shaq Fu for the Sega Genesis. As we begin the game, we're going to change up in the options menu the difficulty to Expert. There are 3 difficulties for you to play on, as well as you can also adjust things like the time per round and also increasing the speed if you want to do so, but I'm going to just leave it on the normal speed. The game has a couple of modes, including one-on-one, a tournament, and then the story mode, which is what I'm going to be completing for this run. The story mode in the Sega Genesis version of Shaq Fu is a little bit different than the Super Nintendo one, just due to so many more characters. They are spread apart a little bit more. Levels are also changed up as far as locations, such as the first level we're going to, the Lost Jungle, the Battle of Voodoo. It's on the left continent here, and on the center one in the SNES version. Just like with the SNES version, Shaq isn't the best character, having only 2 specialty moves he's able to pull off, and they still go off pretty slowly, so for the most part, the most effective way to battle enemies is with the kick. As you can see, even on the normal speed, the game is a lot quicker and much more precise with the controls as far as being able to attack enemies. My main goal, just like with the SNES version, is to try to get the opponent against the far left or right walls. This will allow me to deliver multiple strong kicks in a row, usually trying to be able to stop them from getting any of their specialty moves off. At the beginning of the second round, I wanted to showcase both of Shaq's main moves he's able to do, the rotating flame kick, as well as the disc-like object he's able to throw out. Both can be pretty effective as far as damage is concerned, but overall, for the most part, your kicks are more effective, unless you go into rage mode, in which case, if you're able to land one of your powerful blows while in rage, you'll be able to do a lot of damage. After defeating Voodoo, we're going to head south and go into the Vagabond Temple, which is the location of Raja. Raja has 3 special moves he's able to do, including stabbing the ground to send a shockwave towards you. He'll clap the 2 swords together, which causes a flash that can do a lot of damage, as well as he has a projectile that he can throw straight out towards you. We're going to do our best to try to keep him once again against the wall, and after a few quick combos of our kicks, we're able to drop him and win the first round. As the second round begins, he goes immediately for his flash move, but thankfully I'm far enough away that it doesn't end up making contact with me. One thing you'll also notice is that the rage meter doesn't fill up quite as quickly, as well as it decreases a lot quicker than the SNES version, allowing us to not have to worry too much about being ganged up on. So in some ways, the Genesis version ends up being easier than the SNES one, due to the rage meter not coming into play quite as often. The next opponent we're going to be battling is the first of the new ones that's in the Genesis version but not in the SNES one, and that is Auroch. Not too much for words, and honestly not that great of a character. Even playing as him, he only has 2 special moves. He has a ball and chain he's able to pull up in order to hit you, as well as he will throw across the screen this big wave-like boomerang. Now the thing with the boomerang, when he does throw it out, he's completely vulnerable. He cannot do anything until that move goes off screen. So when you're facing off against him, if you see him do it, you can jump over it and easily deliver a powerful attack to him. The other big thing he's able to do is teleport around, which can be a bit of a nuisance, but usually just allows us to kind of get him back into the corner as we're chasing him down in order to deliver the attacks to defeat him. Like I talked about during my Super Nintendo run of the game, it was released on 5 different platforms. The Genesis version is probably the best overall, but this version was ported over to the Amiga, with pretty much everything still intact from this version. The 2 handheld versions ended up having also less characters. The Game Boy had the same amount as the SNES one, and the Game Gear one had only 6 characters to play as. The only version, though, I've never actually played through all the way and have never owned is the Amiga version, but unfortunately that was only released in Europe, so it was a little bit hard to get a hold of. We're now going to head south and go to Gargoyle's Peak, where we're going to be battling Memphis. Now, he has 3 moves that we have to watch out for. He has this dust move that he basically throws out dust right in front of him in order to hit you. He has lightning that he sends flying up into the air, and then it will crash land wherever you are, which can be tricky to dodge around. And then he also has a lightning move that he can send straight out towards you. He can also be a tad tricky to hit because of his ability to dodge and teleport backwards allows him to sometimes get immediately into one of his projectile moves. So when you want to go ahead and start pursuing him, you need to stay aggressive with it. He may end up doing his lightning move that will end up knocking you back a little bit, and as you can see, this fight gets pretty close, and I'm barely able to at least land that final blow and defeat him for round 1. Since the control and hit detection is a bit better on the Genesis version, your flying kicks end up landing a lot more than they do on the SNES version. This helps with getting characters knocked back quicker and against the wall so that we're able to gang up on them with a flurry of kicks. After leaving Gargoyle's Peak, we're going to head north, and all the way against the left side, which is a little bit difficult to see, is the Yasko Mines, and that is home to Diesel, another one of the characters that only appears in the Genesis and Amiga versions of the game. Diesel has a couple of moves he's able to do, including an uppercut that he uses to charge forward in order to deliver it. He has a flurry of punches he's able to do, his hands kind of turn to flames, but it only hits a really small distance in front of him, so it's really not that effective of a move. As well as he's able to throw out a dagger, and that's all it is. It's just a small dagger that goes all the way across the screen. And just like with a lot of the other enemies in the game, when he does his throwing knife move, it's a good opportunity to do a jumping kick towards him, or quickly deliver another attack so that you're able to stop him from doing his. Well, of course, everyone's going to have their own favorites and least favorites as far as characters are concerned. Diesel was definitely one of the ones I had the least amount of fondness for. I thought his design overall was relatively generic in comparison to some of the other more exotic-looking characters in the game. If an enemy is able to get into their Fury mode, you want to try to be careful if possible, because they have much more powerful attacks during it, and they can really end up devastating your health bar. Next up, we're traveling to the North Gate to face off with Otsu, the final of the opponents for the first continent here in the Sega Genesis Shaq Fu. Otsu is a grand martial arts master who has a few different moves, including an orb he's able to throw out across the screen, a move that he does with his pole that ends up making the entire screen flash, and it can damage you no matter where you are on screen, as well as he's also able to use his pole to kind of just thrust out in order to try to hit you. As we begin round 2, we're going to just knock him immediately over into the corner. Any of the characters can get into kind of a blocking frenzy where they'll block a lot of your attacks. You just pretty much have to be persistent when attacking, but you're not going to get knocked back as quickly away from them, so it's a lot easier to stay close to them in order to deliver those hits. You can also quickly recover and get back close to the enemy, even if you do end up getting knocked away. After completing that battle, we've now defeated everyone on the left side of the screen. We're now going to travel to the center part and battle off against Kaori. Kaori is a very fast fighter, as to be expected. Her tornado move that she's able to do can easily end up dealing a pretty decent amount of damage, but you can also do certain kicks in order to stop the tornado from really doing much. She also has a move where she's able to throw like a bomb at the ground just a little bit in front of her. This usually doesn't end up being too much of a threat because of the distance that it ends up going away from her. Her other two big attacks include a giant projectile that can go the entire length of the screen and is quite large, so you'll have to do a jump in order to avoid it or block it, as well as she also is able to teleport into the air and then come crashing down on top of you. Another thing that the Sega Genesis version ended up having was a few secret hidden bonus fights. Now, I'll be completing these fights during the run, but I'm going to be doing them after I complete the final battle, since they're basically bonus, and there's no storyline or anything else to go along with them. It's 2 extra battles against the 2 final bosses of the game, as well as a bonus stage where you have to defeat a certain number of skeletons within the time limit. Due to her speed and just the amount of moves that she's able to do, Kaori can end up being one of the tougher fights in order to win, but once she's done, we're moving on to the next battle. After leaving the waterfall area, we're going to head south to the lab where we're going to battle the Colonel. Colonel's able to deliver quite a bit of power during his moves, including a missile that he ends up sending off that kind of arcs around in a circle before going towards you. He ends up turning his arm into a machine gun and blasting you with a range of bullets, as well as he has a punch that he's able to throw out with an extended version of his arm to do a decent amount of damage. Our strategy though, even with his increased arsenal, isn't going to change up much, just trying to knock him backwards and get him stuck so that we're able to deliver those hits. I do like the nice jetpack that he has kind of going on for his jump, so it explains why he's able to have such a high jump. Doesn't quite explain why the other characters are able to do it quite as easily as he is. Colonel does his best during this fight to try to get away from me as best as he can, but thankfully I'm able to track him down, and once I deliver the final hit, we're moving on to the next fight, located at the South Gate. Here at the South Gate, we're battling Mizu, who's actually the kid we're trying to save. He's an actual playable, fightable character in this version. Obviously, he's been possessed, so he's evil right now, but it's still kind of interesting that we actually get to beat him up during the game. The North and South Gate stages are pretty much identical to one another, and they are actually also in the SNES version, but you have to use a code in order to unlock them. Mizu does have a couple of interesting moves that he's able to do. He has these two blasts that he's able to put into the ground and end up blowing up when you end up getting close to him, as well as he has a move that he can throw out projectile-wise that if it hits you, you'll actually be frozen for a few seconds, and he also happens to be one of the smaller characters, as you can see, so he can be sometimes a bit tricky as far as landing certain hits against him, but he still ends up being not too bad of a fight for us during this playthrough. With Mizu defeated, we now have the bridge opened up at the South Gate and can travel to the third island. The first of the two battles that we're going to do here at the end of the game is against Beast. Beast is a pretty challenging opponent. He's basically Sett's right-hand man, and he has a handful of moves he's able to do. He has a big blast he's able to send out of his mouth towards you, a scream-like move he's able to do that basically flashes the screen, and if you're anywhere near it, will end up hurting you, as well as he also has a big claw move he's able to do with his hands that, if this hits you, also can devastate your health bar, especially considering he can go into Fury mode in just a hit or two, so because of this, he can really end up doing a ton of damage to you if you're not careful. As round 2 begins, I immediately start with a jumping kick towards them to try to knock him back towards that wall. Alternating your moves from doing a low sweeping kick to then a forward thrust kick ends up working pretty well. Even if they block the low kick, if you go right into that forward thrusting kick, you're usually able to land it and do a bit of damage to him and just kind of repeat that cycle. And I know it's far from the most exciting strategies in the world, but it ends up being pretty effective, and once we defeat Beast, we now move on to the final boss of the game, known as Sett. Sett has a lot of moves. He's able to send out his wrappings towards you in order to damage you. He can send them into the ground and have them pop out wherever you're standing. He has a giant rotating spike of death that he does when he does any of his jumping attacks. Overall, Sett can be quite a pain in the butt to deal with. Our strategy, though, pretty much remains the same as far as knocking him back towards the wall and then delivering as many attacks as possible to him. When he does try to do his wrappings through the ground in order to grab you basically with them, this is a great chance in order to deliver either a jumping attack to him or just a straight up thrust kick in order to do a pretty good amount of damage to him. This fight against him ends up going a lot smoother than the SNES version, mostly just due to the overall better control really helped Shaq be able to deliver the attacks a lot quicker, and thus keeping the enemies at bay a bit more. Once he's defeated though, we get to enjoy the ending to Shaq Fu. but I do still have the bonus fights I'm going to be doing after we finish up the ending. So there you have it, Shaq Fu for the Sega Genesis. After you complete the game, you do have the credits rolling. There's no background image, though, during this fight, which I thought was a bit odd. It may have been a technical issue for having all the scrolling text going on while the demo was going. But either way, you get a nice, really kind of intense fight. Basically, the best fighting possible in Shaq Fu plays out during the credit sequence here. Shaq Fu is a very interesting title in gaming history. I mean, without it, I probably wouldn't have the name Cornshaq, but also at the same time, just the fact that the game exists with Shaquille O'Neal in a fighting game, especially during that era. It originally was going to be a basketball game, but since Shaq ended up liking Mortal Kombat and some other fighting games, they ended up making it a full-blown fighter. Honestly, if it just had a bit more work done to it, it could have actually been a pretty enjoyable fighting game. And even now, it's not awful, especially if you have some friends that also know the game a little bit. There are some enjoyable matches to be had. After the credits finish up, you then get your top scores list, and you can put in your initials if you want to do so, and then it's going to go back to the main menu and start the game all over again. But instead of doing that, we're going to instead jump back into the story mode, and I'm going to show you guys the bonus fights. You can do these battles at any time, but if you're gonna include them in the story, probably the best time to do it is once you open up the second continent to go to. Head to the very south of the screen. In the lower right corner of the first continent, there's basically a staircase that leads to a hidden door, and if you press start there, you unlock this special fight against a blue version of Beast. I think the fight's actually trickier than his normal version, but for the most part, it's still pretty much the same fight here. He has the same moves and all, and there's no story as far as an intro or outro to it, and I don't think it ends up affecting anything else if you end up winning these fights. As a kid, I never knew that these ended up existing. I don't know why I never discovered them. I actually would run around the map occasionally while playing the game and just press buttons anywhere to see if there was hidden stuff. And then, of course, later on, I find out, yeah, there actually was. I just somehow ended up missing them. Probably just due to the fact it's kind of difficult to get to that staircase on the map, as well as the other ones are pretty well hidden as well. Once you end up winning the battle, though, you go right back to the map screen, and from here we're going to head up and go across the bridge to the second continent. In the lower right area below the south gate, the little opening between those two pillars is the second of the bonus fights. And this is a rematch against Sett, or I guess a battle against Sett, except he has a green and pink purplish color scheme to him, and as you can see, you battle him on the Gargoyle's peak level at night. A pretty tricky fight, as always, against Sett. It pretty much is the same kind of battle you normally would have. Maybe there is a slight increased difficulty with this fight and the Beast one, but I really don't notice it much. There really isn't any other strategy that I use during these fights, just kind of knock him back towards the wall as best as possible, and of course attack him anytime he ends up sending his wrapping down into the ground to try to hit you. Great way in order to deliver a hit, and if you follow that up usually with a thrust kick, you can usually end up landing it afterwards. Still though, even though there's not a whole lot special with these fights other than the different color scheme, it's still kind of a cool little addition and secret that's included in this version of the game, and I assume is also in the Amiga version, though I've never played that one. Now the third and final battle, which I've saved for last, is located in the upper right corner in the very edge of the cliff here. Now this is a bonus stage where you have to battle skeletons, a different enemy altogether that appears nowhere else in the game, and you can just go back and forth kicking them. You want to try to defeat as many as possible during the time, and if you do so, you'll get rewarded with a nice extra continue. As you can see, for me, the best strategy is just to alternate between the left and right thrusting kicks. Sometimes you may have to do 2 kicks in order to land a attack against the skeletons, but still, just the fact that this exists is pretty cool. And there you guys go. That is Shaq Fu for the Sega Genesis, all the bonus fights, including the entire story mode. And with that, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.